Welcome back to Tabletop Titans. Again, welcome back to Tabletop Titans. And Knowledge November. My name is Adrian. I'm joined by Brian, Lil B Leva, and we're excited to be here today to talk about how to master the deployment phase, I guess, the deployment step of Warhammer. Of course, November is going to be all about knowledge. It's all about improving ourselves as players, as people who write lists, and to want to just kind of become more competitive. I have the World Championships at the end of the month, which is going to be a ton of fun. And also, I was told I can't do Towvember, so it's going to be Knowledge November. Thanks, Mel.
Also, Adrian, I don't know if you knew this, but knowledge is spelled with K.
I know.
So really,
it sounds good.
It sounds good, but it's KN this month.
It's KN the month. I was like, maybe we should spell it like Knowledge November, and then it's like KK. Let's go.
Okay. I can do that. Yeah.
But I don't know if it's going to take off. We'll try. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you tuning in live. Of course, if you want to see more of this content, hit that like, subscribe, and ding Nurgle's bell down below. It's going to be a ton of fun this month. This first session is going to be public to everyone, but the other ones, of course, are going to be for members only. This is normally when we would be doing our hobby stuff on Thursday. So for this month, trying something a little bit different, it's going to be a ton of fun. So let us know in the comments below if you want more tactic sessions and all that stuff. That really is how we built this channel, and it's going to be fun to do some sessions kind of like we used to. So today we're going to talk about deployment. We're going to talk about things to consider, questions to ask yourself, questions to ask your opponents, ways to approach it, and of course, as always, this is going to be a discussion between us and you, chat. It's not going to be a lecture, which reminds me we'll have to grab a laptop so we can see chat. But it's going to be an absolute blast. So thank you for joining us. With that, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So in deployment, there's a few questions I want y'all to kind of ask yourselves. And the first one is, do you need the first drop? You show up to the table, you're looking at your lists, and you are going to be deciding, you've won the roll-off to decide who is attacker or defender. On competitive boards, it doesn't really matter. It's just who's going to do the first drop.
Yep.
So I guess, Brian, my first question for you is, what are the pros and cons of dropping the first unit?
Yeah, definitely. So one of the biggest pros of being able to drop the first unit is if you both have infiltrating style units, so like scouts, infiltrators. I mean, there's a billion other units, Jaegers for Votan. There's a lot of things that you want the first drop for, so that way you can kind of claim an area of the table and to prevent your opponent from having that space and that being able to apply pressure on that particular side. So it's really, really important so that way you can help defend yourself, as well as now you can apply your own pressure to that side of the table, and it just lets you get a foothold in an area in which you might not have been able to if your opponent was able to get the first drop. Because some armies have a lot of infiltrate, like Eldar, for example, have a lot of like striking scorpions. They have rangers. They have a ton of things that can either infiltrate and or scout. And infiltrating is really big to stop the scouting. So that's like one of the biggest benefits of having the first drop, is just to be able to get your foothold before your opponent can.
Exactly. So you show up to the table, you're looking at the lists, or even just asking them, talking to them, ask them, do they have any infiltrators? How many do they are? And then find out what kind of units they are. And that's really going to kind of determine whether you need that first drop or not. And so we can actually give a direct example here on this board. This is Crucible Battle style deployment. We're actually going to play on this later on today, so you can see if we're actually going to apply anything that we teach you. Lindsay, would you be able to grab my laptop from my bag right there?
Yep, I came out here looking for
Perfect. Yeah, we're gonna pull up chat. I already see we have a super chat, so thank you very much. So you can see here, there's really two interesting places where we might want to block each other off, right? This is a nice kind of staging point where you can be tucked in onto an objective, and this is outside of our deployment zone. You can see Brian has the same thing on his side, and why do we care if someone deploys first? Well, you're going to be potentially stopping one of those things. So, for example, if Brian, you want to show kind of, if you won this roll-off, where might you go, and why might that be the case?
Yeah. So I am more of a conservative style player, but if I was an aggressive kind of player, I have scouts here from Space Marines, and I could just take like this area of the table, and that would prevent Adrian from kind of getting the upper hand, so to speak, on this kind of side, and it also lets me stage to make sure that he can't scout onto this objective if he has like sticky objectives with scout, like Strike Marines have for Grey Knights, or Kroot, for example. A lot of the times, if you go first and you have those types of units that can scout onto an objective, you can just stop that from happening, because you can't end with a 9, which means you won't be able to tag the objective. So it prevents your scoring while also giving me, if I go first, the added benefit of well, here's an easy cleanse, here's an easy secure, here's an easy contain, engage, whatever the other secondaries are. So this would be something potentially, staying off the objective for reasons that we'll talk about later, but this would be something a little more aggressive, something a little more conservative that I would probably tend to do. It's kind of doing the same thing, but on the other side, where it's a little bit closer to myself, where I'm a little bit safer, where I can tuck inside of this building. I'll put them on top of the building just so you guys can see. But tucked inside of the building, holding the objective behind a wall, having a space outside my deployment zone, getting ready to do other things, and also preventing Adrian from being able to do this to me on the other side.
Exactly. And so you can see, whoops. Nice. Exactly. And you can kind of see two different approaches. One thing to consider, Brian mentioned, some armies have lots of infiltrators. Some have very few. You know, I think like on my Space Marine list, for example, it's just this. There's 1 unit of infiltrators, 1 unit of scouts, and I need those units a lot. So I can't necessarily throw them away the way that we have here. But some factions, Chaos for example, might have a couple squads of Nurglings for exactly this. Chaos often, there's a lot of melee focus in Chaos. They want to be aggressive. So they will use Nurglings in this kind of situation here, not just to stop you from getting close, but to stop you from blocking them. And that kind of becomes a pathway that they know they can move up. They can start doing deep strikes here earlier on. They can be throwing things through, and it's not going to be like a wall of infiltrators that go stand in front of them. Yep. So if they have little throwaway units, that becomes part of the factor. Most armies, I'm gonna keep pressing that button. Most armies, it's like just 1 or 2, and you want to think about that. If they don't have any infiltrators, don't do the first drop, generally speaking. Yep. You are just going to be giving up information. That is the one thing, is okay, they're doing the drop, they have to declare a lot of their stuff first, they have to do that first unit down, you can then respond and kind of see what's happening. So if all things are considered equal and you're not interacting in the middle, let them have that first thing. You'll get 1 unit of advantage and then kind of knowledge on them. And for some armies, elite armies, that matters a lot, and that means a lot. So really, that's the first question. Do you need the first drop? Do they have infiltrators? Do you have infiltrators? Et cetera, et cetera. To be honest, yeah, if you have no infiltrators, you also have them go first because nothing matters there.
Yeah, because if Adrian has no infiltrators and I have infiltrators, I know that I will always be able to infiltrate no matter what happens.
Yeah.
So therefore, I want to take the second drop, as Adrian said, to gain as much information as possible, in the same way that if I don't have any, Adrian's going to be doing the same. But also, if you're afraid of like a really big, scary unit, and you don't necessarily know where to put stuff because of that unit, and you have like this one thing that's a great target for Adrian's one thing that he knows he's going to try and go for, so like a Demon Primarch or some type of super heavy like a Baneblade or whatever, if you're so afraid of that unit and you don't want to put one of yours down, try to delay that as long as possible. So that could also be a reason to take the second drop, even if you do have infiltrators and your opponent has infiltrators, just to try to pace out the deployment phase. That way you know where this thing is going, so you can kind of deploy around it.
Exactly. Very, very well said. And before we go to the next question, I want to thank Matthew Powell, who has a question of their own. Thank you so much, Matthew Powell, for the super chat. Matthew says, Brian, as someone who regularly goes first, do you deploy with the belief that you roll high, or are you always hopeful to go second?
Look, I love that this is a question, because honestly, it's something that I think about all the time.
Yeah, look, it is.
Like genuine, like that's not a joke. I genuinely think about this all the time, especially because I play Grey Knights that oftentimes want to go second, or Eldar that always wants to go second. I play armies that want to play second turn, and I have to set up with the idea that I will be going first. But that can also be a double-edged sword, because if you set up to go first and you go second, you run the risk of now your opponent can be aggressive, and if you deploy aggressively to go first, you can get hit pretty hard. So oftentimes I will have 1 or 2 units staged to do things turn 1, and then everything else is a little more conservative in my approach to the game. So that way, if I go second, I might lose a unit, I might lose 2 units, but I'm not going to lose my whole army. And if I go first, I can still do stuff and not feel like I wasted my first turn.
Exactly. I think that's 100% a good way to look at it. And Tuesday we had Shane on playing Votann. Votann, we'll talk more about Votann throughout today because they have very interesting deployment style. They have lots of scouts. And so when you're a Votann player, you're actually setting up for both eventualities, same way everyone else is, but you have a bit more flexibility. You can say, okay, if I go second, I'm going to move back and be safe. If I'm going first, I'm going to move forwards and kind of get set up. And you are kind of setting up right in the midline, where most armies don't want to do that, right? Because, spoiler alert, unless you're Brian, it's a 50% chance that you're going first or second. You can't control that. Yeah. So considering what happens if you go first and what happens if you go second is very important, and it really depends on the style of army you play. Thanks, Matthew Powell, for the support. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to Knowledge November. Let me bring this cart closer on. I'm glad to see Doc Mel is in chat, of course. Excited to learn how to deploy today. Welcome, everybody. Make sure to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below if you want to see more of this style content. We've been really trying to do more content lately, and it's been fun. So, with that, and welcome Taylor, who says, here to get better at deploying my World Eaters army. We'll also talk about World Eaters a little bit later. So there you go. With that, let's talk about the next big question. So you decided, okay, do I need the first drop or not? The next question is, boom. What is your triangle? We're not about shapes, folks. We're getting down to the basics. This is
going back to geometry.
Yeah, knowledge remember. We're learning about shapes. Okay. So the triangle is a concept that has existed in many editions of 40k. Kind of what it means has shifted, but generally speaking, it has existed. The triangle is, what are the 3 objectives you're going to be trying to hold in order to go up on your opponent? So you can see here we have 5 objectives. 5 objectives, very common. There are often 6 objectives as well, but in this case, you're either holding at least half or holding a majority. And your triangle is kind of picking which way you're trying to lean on a particular deployment. And the way I think of the triangle is the first part of the triangle, the first vertex, is your home objective. Hopefully you can hold on to your home objective. We'll talk about how to protect that later on. The second one is, what is your safe advanced expansion? And so in this case, you can see if I'm on this side, this is my home objective. I have 2 that are outside of my deployment zone. This one very much in the middle. We're using GW style deployment today. This much safer because I can be tucked in. Let's say I'm playing Space Marines. I can have my scouts back here on the objective. I'll put them up atop so you can see. On the objective in safety. And I'm going to be able to kind of reinforce this. I can have people back behind this obscuring terrain, and I can continue sending units in to reclaim, recapture, protect. So home objective, my safe expansion, and then my riskier expansion, but it's kind of the place that I'm going to start to move. It might be this one. It might honestly be this one. This one is very, very in the open, right? Whereas this one, if I manage to push around and actually get inside of this terrain, I'm going to be safe against anything that isn't able to get that angle or isn't charging in. So you want to consider, what is that third part of your triangle? It's not always obvious. In this case, actually, it's a little bit tougher, right?
Yeah. I think a good way to look at it also is if you have to commit a lot and you know that you can't really hold an objective, even if you throw a super durable unit out there, right? So like a unit of, let's say, 10 Terminators.
Sure, yeah.
Pretty durable, 2 up armor, 4 up 1, we'll say. But if you were to throw them in the middle of the table, they're probably going to die.
Exactly.
And you're not going to hold the objective anyways, which means you have to allocate more than just those Terminators. So now it's a very cost-intense resource to try to maintain, which makes it not super worth it, right? Now, if you have an army that has a lot of aggression, like World Eaters, for example, that becomes a little more feasible. But generally speaking, I would often go kind of like how Adrian's saying with the flanks, because for the same reasons, you can stage safely on one objective. If this is my home objective, my safe objective, I would oftentimes, for the same reasons, look to this objective as well, and then just kind of let this be a question mark for both of us.
Exactly. That third triangle that you're going for is going to be contested. It's one you're going to be fighting for back and forth. It's what's the one that gives you the best odds. Right. So really that triangle is very important in many matchups. It is, okay, which side of the board are you going to try to lean into, right? I'm going to actually start leaning this, or I think this one's safe, and it actually means I'm going to start actually leaning this way in an odd way, because this is kind of easy to reinforce. But that's going to be very map dependent and army dependent. So that's the next one. Yeah, triangle's great shape. Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate that feedback. It's good. Do you need the first drop? What is your triangle? And similarly, what are your positions for secondaries? So some of these will seem obvious, but it's important to kind of ask yourselves these questions when you're getting set up. What are the secondaries that you can score turn 1, and how do you set up for them? So we think about, okay, what do we need to do? Can we extend battle lines? Hopefully we can do that. That one is easy. It's just hold your home objective and hold 1 in the middle. So be able to reach it. This could involve an advance because it doesn't require an action. You don't have to, you can advance and go ahead and do that. Things that are harder are cleanse. How are you going to be set up to do cleanse turn 1? And so really make sure that, okay, over here, unless you have infiltrate units, you're not necessarily going to be reaching it. You need something faster That's actually the only answer here.
Yeah.
You need something faster. The one in the middle, do we have some, let me grab some just regular intercessors or something. Let's see. Actually, that's going to be pretty far as well. I was like doing forward deploy, but it is kind of an example. If we wanted to like use an infiltrator here and be kind of set up, sometimes don't feel like just because you have infiltrate, don't feel like you have to completely commit and be like all the way down in. In this case, you're what, 3 inches closer, and it's going to make a huge difference. Yep. Because if we do draw that cleanse, we can go ahead and move forwards. Again, we talked about scouts earlier. If you're going first, you can just scout forward, and maybe even you're moving forwards and getting even farther inside of the enemy lines. But making sure that you're considering, what is that movement? Do I have the ability to reach it without an advance?
I mean, that's also what you said too, is a good call out. Just because you have the ability to scout doesn't necessarily mean you have to use it.
Exactly.
And, for this example, he's a couple inches out of his deployment zone, but it's a really good spot to be in. Because not only is he up in the corner of the building to potentially take stuff on the middle objective, but he's also not taking up the space behind that building where that deployment line is. So another unit can stage behind and still have that safety of the terrain piece. So he's kind of having the best of both worlds, where he's up out of his deployment zone, safe from any danger, and then also can score while also leaving room for the rest of his units behind to still do the same. So it's really important to think about, like, yes, I have it, scout. Do I need to scout? And how effective will the scout be if I go ahead and go as far forward as I can?
Some of this real estate is worth more than others, right? You're being able to stage for a few turns and get in there. So that's very important. In a similar vein, we have noticed that without infiltrate, you can't really reach any of these without proper movement, right? So transports are great for this because you can move them up. If you have like a rhino, for example, be positioned in relative safety, scooch on up, do the action here, vice versa, whatever. Like, that's fine. So things that can move up, be kind of tough to kill. And if the transport dies, you can hop out into the ruin and be relatively safe. That's fantastic. The other thing, and you'll see these a lot in Pariah Nexus, jump pack units. Jump pack infantry are incredible, and they are extremely sought after in Pariah Nexus because we can't advance and do actions under any circumstances. So being able to go through a wall, 12 inches, land on an objective without advancing, and perform an action is extremely important. So we see jump pack intercessors. I have my storm boys here. We have basically any jump.
Yeah, warp spiders, swooping hogs, Vespid. Yeah.
So important. And so in this case, I've grabbed storm boys, but this also applies, frankly, for my space marines. I pretty much always start with 2 units of jump packs on the board in a position in which I can score those early game objectives if I need to. And of course, here you have the power of being able to be all the way back here safe, or maybe all the way back here safe, or a little bit further up in case I wanted to range forward, and be ready for those secondaries. So in this case, actually, what I'll do is I'll pre-measure, do I have 12 inches to this objective? Do I have 12 inches to this objective? That's absolutely critical. And in these units, ideally, again, I'll actually do the same thing. So I'll kind of set them up for 2 potential objectives. I don't know if I'm going first. I don't know when I'm going to get cleanse or establish locus or whatever. So this could honestly be a whole talk. Is like, how do you prepare for turn 1 secondaries? But think about at least those essentials.
Another thing to think about when thinking about secondaries too is staging for something like contain, right, or engage. Where engage a little bit more to what I'm thinking here, but yes, engage is fairly easy turn 1. But what do you have to waste? What do you have to get rid of to do it? So like you want trading pieces is something that you'll hear often thrown around in the Warhammer 40k community. It's like having a unit that you know isn't going to do anything except score some amount of points and then die, or like contest an objective and then die, or do an action and die. So that's like your first kind of trade piece where you're not actually doing much with it, but you are just trying to score some amount of points, and then it goes away, and you're starting the trades. Like your opponent will now have to commit something to kill them, and then you kill that thing, and then you're trading back and forth, which is, again, the reason they're called trades. But setting up for a secondary, and then when you draw the secondary, like engage, is it worth the 2 points?
Exactly.
Is it worth the 2-point established focus in the center? Is it worth trying to go for sabotage? Is it worth trying to get recovered assets? Those things, while you can set up to try to get them done, on turn 1, is it worth it? And that's a question for the matchup, for the table, for the mission that you're playing, and like just the amount of resources you have versus your opponent, so units generally speaking. because you could easily get engaged on this this board, right? So like
sure.
if I deployed here with these scouts, and let's say they're not scouts. Let's say they're these blade guard, because my bad.
No, you're good.
Scouts are a little bit different because they have infiltrate or whatever. But like,
Right.
let's say this is like my unit to get me engaged on this side, and I have these eradicators on this side over here, and I don't have any scouts. Like I have no infiltrates, I have no scouts. I have a unit in this table quarter, I have a unit in that table quarter. I have to put something over here in this table quarter to get me engaged. The only thing I can do with is to get rid of a unit. I have to throw away a unit.
Yep.
Whatever is here in the open is gonna die, and I know that.
For sure.
So is it worth me scoring 2 points to lose this potential unit?
Exactly.
And the answer is almost always no.
Correct.
Almost always no.
Yeah, 100% agree. Almost, in pretty much any army.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about, in those cases, 2 points not worth it. Can you get extra value on top? I really want my units to, at any moment, be doing two things. And that literally is just very abstract. Two things: scoring a secondary and preparing for something else. Scoring a secondary and screening someone out. You know, whatever it is, even just 5 scouts, 5 storm boys, if they just jump out and score 2 points, it is not worth it. But in this, in different cases, for example, yeah, will you pass me those scouts actually? Let's say we've got Rhino full of berserkers here, and I've got my scouts like so. You know, they started back behind. I've scouted up. I know I have the first turn. Okay, I've drawn cleanse. I have a choice. I can cleanse on this objective and die, or I can move back and be safe. Let's say it's only a 2-point cleanse. That by itself is not worth it. However, if, actually, let's say I'm a bit more forwards with this. I can move back 6 inches to safety, or I can move forwards. The cleanse by itself, not worth it. The cleanse plus saying, you know what, they're going to die anyway, so I'm just going to go ahead and push myself all the way out so that Brian cannot get his Rhino onto my objective without fighting first or whatever.
Yeah,
now
or getting
I'm at
the
least
berserkers out or whatever the case
exactly.
is. Yeah.
Make them use that. At least now they're doing two things. They're scoring the objective and they're forcing his assets to be awkward and to be wasted or whatever. So even then, maybe consider, maybe you don't do it. But look for that as a general rule of thumb. Make sure they're at least doing a couple things at once.
Yeah, but not every secondary is always going to be worth the points that you could potentially score from it, especially if you're having to commit way too many things for it.
Yeah.
Like engage for 3 units. If you only have your deployment zone on like table quarters, then you know if you step out, you'll get killed because you're playing against Votan that scouted the entire time, and you had no infiltrates to stop the scout. You know if you step out anywhere, you will just get killed turn 1.
Right.
So
Just don't do it.
don't do it.
Also, that second behind enemy lines is almost never worth it.
Never.
At that point, you're spending a whole unit for
1 point. Never worth it.
Not worth it.
Unless you were going to be there already,
Yeah.
then don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much, Malprivate, for the question. How do you feel about the fact that it's so common to hide away behind terrain, tactically viable, but not very heroic narratively? You know what, that's fair. And I think the game's come a long way to merging tactics and narrative. I'll just say that, period. There used to be a time where it was like, you wanted to interact as little as possible, nothing heroic happened because you were just like, if you're trying to win the game and you were looking for narrative things to happen, they were just so diegetically opposed, or not, diametrically opposed to each other, that was never gonna happen. Yeah. It's more true now. Think about it like this. This is how I think about it. At the end of the day, this is still an abstraction, right? They are securing objectives, they're holding down buildings. These objectives are also abstractions of other things happening on the field. They're deploying, secret homers or extracting stuff like that. So even if they're just standing behind a building, they're still doing something. They're securing the point, whatever it might be. So
they're clearing the building, they're doing whatever, right? It's not
exactly.
All the buildings aren't just L's.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. Like this is an actual structure. There's actual things happening. It's a war zone. Yeah. Stuff is going on.
Exactly. So kind of keep that in mind, and that's something the game has moved more towards is more of like an abstraction. It's less of some people. This is a whole other video. It's less of a war game and more of just a game at this point. So, which is okay. But thank you for the question. Again, folks, let us know in chat if you have questions, if you have concerns about your own particular army. We'll get more into that towards the end of the session, but definitely always open to hearing your questions now. All right. The screen's very small and far away. I will try to click on the next question. Boom! What will you contest? So we've alluded to this a few times because it's so important, it's so natural. We talked about the triangle, your home objective, your safe objective, and your expansion objective. The other thing to consider is what objectives are worth just turning off for your opponent, making it difficult for them to get, or just turning off the primary. Remember, this is a teams is always differential, but really you're always playing with a difference, right? So if I gain 5 points, or if you don't gain 5 points, that's the same at the end of the day, more or less. Yep. And so look at the board state and think, okay, where can I position myself to turn off an objective for my opponent, even just for one turn? Because we mentioned a unit is not worth 2 points, but it might be worth 5 points.
Yeah.
And again, we're kind of positioned for this already with things like the Storm Boys. I love Storm Boys for exactly this reason. Brian's got 5 infiltrators on the objective there. I want to have myself set up so that if he goes first, I'm able to, at a minimum, advance them onto the objective, turn it off, and stop him. And in fact, this is a fight that's awkward enough. I've had it go wrong a couple times. I might even consider just sitting there, because if they even kill a couple of me, then they flip that objective back. But in this case, again, what we're doing is we're pushing him back. We're preventing deep strikes in his next turn, because we're extending that bubble, and also rapid ingress. And then we're flipping the objective and subtracting 5 points. And this is getting into later parts of the game, but just consider where you are starting, where are you deploying to be able to do that. And you're really considering throw units, or at least units that are going to go in, punch, and die. So that is a big thing, is you don't always have to hold on to you want to hold on to your objectives, but sometimes just disrupting your opponent is enough.
Yeah. Contesting an objective is oftentimes as much value as being able to hold your home. Like if you know, in this instance, if I know for a fact I can only ever hold 2 objectives because the army that Adrian's going to be playing is going to make it almost impossible for me to get that third.
Right.
How do I make it almost impossible for him to also get that third, and just to keep it the same on primary in that manner?
Yeah.
So I don't need to necessarily hold 3 the entire game if I can also prevent Adrian from holding 3 for the entire game. So contesting is just as valuable as scoring points if you can do it at the same time as your opponent.
Exactly. And that's where this middle objective, this just absolute death objective, this is where there's going to be a lot of trading, where someone might try to be cheeky. Brian, if he does have this Rhino, put the Rhino up. 3 OC, whatever. If it dies, you don't particularly care as long as it dies at the right time. Maybe you've moved it here so that when I kill it, the Berserkers get out here and they're pretty dang safe. Or they get on the objective and you still hold it, right? So these are the kinds of objectives where nobody's expected to survive, but we're both trying to eke out just a little bit more value by throwing things onto it into the bloodbath. So that's a brief point, but an important one. Drew wants to know, how do you play Warhammer? How do you play Warhammer, Drew?
Oftentimes with dice and a friend.
Yeah. Usually, hopefully.
Or not, Look, it's all abstract. We said that already.
Right. Anonymous is asking, how do you deploy Imperial Knights? Absolutely, we can take a look. We can talk about that. And then, that's about it. Perfect. Welcome in, everybody. He's trying to keep up to date on chat. Lindsay is working on stuff for Saturday's show, so excited. All right, let's take a look at the next question. All right, what is your mid or long-term plan? This one has been very near and dear to my heart lately, playing my Dark Angels, because the Dark Angels are all about systematically pushing forward, setting up your army, rapid ingressing over the course of 3, sometimes even 4 turns, and then having the big push where you go through and you go in. So really considering, you don't know what secondary is going to draw. It's hard to predict what your opponent's going to do, but what are you trying to do by the end? We've been talking a lot about World Eaters. Where are you trying to get going, and where are you going to go? Not just on the first turn, where maybe you're trying to secure this one and kill this stuff over here, but what's the plan after that? And you really need to consider we do have the Eradicators over here. Eradicators, absolutely devastating unit, very, very killy. But you got to plan where they're going to be, because it's a long way to the top if you want to rock and roll. You know what I'm saying?
They walk 5 inches. So you gotta be really careful.
You have to be prepared, and you got to think in the deployment phase. Where are the key targets that they want? Brian, you mentioned waiting for them to deploy those key units. That's absolutely number 1. Number 2, failing that, how can you position yourself so you're flexible and able to go either direction? So in this case, I like running my Eradicators in a repulsor because they can sort of flex where they're going. So in this board state, potentially just being right here smack dab in the middle, so that no matter where I guess if I'm on this side, no matter where Angron goes, I'm able to go ahead and chase him. So thinking about, that might not happen for a turn, 2 turns, even 3 turns, but you got to be ready to do it when it comes time. Think about your plans. Plan for the future.
Plan for the future. Yeah,
Right?
and like if you have like a melee unit also,
Yes.
and you know that you're going to want to stage those melee units going into your further turns, you have to be in a place in your deployment zone, obviously, to be able to get to the building, so that way you can stage behind the wall. So like obviously this building here is just outside of the deployment zone, so you can't actually stage inside of the L, but you would want to be behind here with a melee unit or with a big shooting unit that can either shoot and move or whatever. Be inside of this L, knowing that there is some type of angle that they can get if your opponent wants to do that, or having this L to do the same. But again, you have to be aware that this is where you want to stage when you're deploying. That way you can actually utilize it effectively.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that also goes back to the whole contesting thing. If you have a unit sitting here that's a really big melee threat, a really big shooting threat, your opponent's less likely to put something in the middle.
Right.
Because that also can give them secondaries. Like, give me secondaries if Adrian decides he wants to put something there. I can get over force, I can storm hostile objective, no prisoners, whatever the case is. And knowing that, he's less likely to want to do something here. So the threat of what I have is enough to deter him from trying to score the points here, which means that I don't actually have to do anything.
Yeah,
like, the staging is enough. You know?
Exactly.
And that's a big deal.
And that's you know, when you're thinking about, okay, I would like for them to drop their big thing so I can target it with my big thing. That's great. But if you can't do that, use yours to dictate where they want to be, because they're often trying to avoid each other, right? Like I'm, I went against Lord of Skulls in teams, and it was like we were both kind of trying to get each other, but also trying to avoid each other at the same time. Or, oh, you know what it was? Hypercrypt. Where are the monoliths going to go? Where are the DDAs going to go? Yep. And so in the end, it's like, okay, I had to drop first, but I can kind of dictate where maybe they want to be or don't want to be based off of that. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to put them here. And now I'm going to learn something about my opponent. Are they going to position themselves so they can come after me? Or are they going to pivot to the other side of the battlefield? In which case, I've also kind of accomplished a goal, and I've decided where they are. And that will also tell me about what kind of player they are. Yep. Are they going to be aggressive? Are they going to be defensive? It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Connor asks a great question. Sorry, Connor has good questions as well, but Drew has a question about how many resources should you commit to your expansion objective. So this is not your safe objective. This is your first expansion out. Yeah.
I have thoughts. Yeah. So, for me, it's all very dependent on if Adrian is already set up there and I want to go there. What is on the objective currently that I need to kill or that I need to out OC or whatever the case is, right? And how durable is the thing that I'm sending out? So if it's just to contest the objective, and all I want to do is contest the objective, 5 Storm Boys on that side is enough.
Yeah.
And that's all you need to commit.
You don't want to do anything actually.
Right. But if I have like 5 Terminators on the objective and Adrian wants to take it off me, he needs to commit something real. And he needs to be able to kill these 5 Terminators, or at least charge them and stay alive throughout the combat. So that is, it's more of like a, it's a terrible answer, but like it's always situation dependent, right?
It is.
It's a terrible answer, but that genuinely is kind of the answer. It's very situation dependent.
But it's a good measure for contesting. Just the minimum, just enough.
The bare minimum.
And you got to learn what that means for your army.
Yep.
I mentioned Storm Boys sometimes whiffing into infiltrators, and then on the other side, you want hedge your bets if you can, because you can't go back. Once you lost those 5 points, you lose those 5 points. Right. So the question is, you mentioned Terminators. Terminators potentially can hold their own and just stone the objective. If that might not be enough, I would like to have a backup plan, and I'll try to layer it generally 2 units and then 1 backup unit that might not reclaim it this turn, but they're sort of ready and they're a threat.
Yep.
And just like we mentioned earlier, that threat, Brian looking at that and saying, okay, he has 2 units and next turn he's probably going to take it back from me. Is that worth it now? I don't know.
Because if we're doing like a 1-to-1 metric, if Adrian has 3 units on this objective, I need at least 3 units.
Yeah.
So to make me feel comfortable. And even then, I want probably 4 units to make me feel a little bit more secure, right? So it's one of those things where like, whatever he commits, I have to commit +1 to be safe or to guarantee. And I think, obviously, again, it depends on the units that you're using, but as like a general rule of thumb, that's kind of where I would lean towards.
Yep.
But if you have to commit more, like if it's Angron sitting on an objective, obviously 5 infiltrators aren't going to do it.
Right.
Obviously, like 5 Terminators, they're not going to do it. So you have to really gauge whether or not it's worth tagging the objective, whether or not it's worth trying to kill Angron and just standing on it if you want to charge him, whatever the case is. So you have to do a lot of like threat assessment and decide, is the expansion worth it this turn? If the answer is no, then don't commit anything.
Yep.
If it's worth contesting, contest it. If it's worth taking it, take it. Because again, as Adrian said earlier, you want your units to do more than one thing. You want them to do more than just walk up and contest an objective. You want them to contest an objective, potentially do secondary, screen out, do whatever the case is, right? So if all you're doing is stopping an objective from a unit, it's good, great.
Yeah, totally.
But it's not going to be the same value as like, all right, I have cleanse, so I'll take it off you and then cleanse.
Exactly. Especially because here, when we're talking about like the expansion objective and your home objective, these really should be non-negotiable. Like you gotta hang on to them. Otherwise, you're just gonna be hemorrhaging points for the rest of the game. So, like Brian said, commit them +1, them +2, right? And then one final point on that: can they just stand on the objective? How do you want them to engage with you? What you can do is you can say, okay, I'm worried about, so AdMech, right, for example. One thing they actually really are great at is just flipping objectives. They run up, they put a lot of OC, they could just bog you up and give you -1 OC. So you want to decide, okay, I don't like that. So in this case, I want to make sure that I'm sort of covering the objective in a way that they're not going to get enough bodies, and I'm just going to kind of hang into that. However, let's say you have the advantage. This is 10 OC here, and I'm going against, I don't know, even 5 scouts or whatever. Them just standing on it is not going to be enough. And now they need to throw something real in. So that's kind of two things. Like, are you trying to just body block them? And do you have the OC and durability advantage? Or do you need to force their hand so that they come in? And then heroic intervention is going to be really, really great there.
Yeah. Another thing to keep in mind also is if you're going to be doing like for the seeing what you need to commit, depending on what your opponent is doing. If you have like a melee unit that really is the only thing that can flip this objective, and they have 2 units on the objective, right? But your melee unit can definitely kill 2 units. But if they're positioned in such a way where you have all of your OC on the back of an objective, like with these intercessors, and there's 10 OC here on the back of this objective, and you're coming in from this side, right? So we'll have the Blade Guard be the example. You're trying to charge in this way, and you know that you could make a charge on the back unit. However, their second unit of scouts is making a line in front of you.
Right.
So there's not a really easy way to get into combat. It's like the charge is very, very failable. Is it worth you trying to flip the objective?
Right.
To me, it's not.
No.
If I don't have guns to clear the scouts, there's never a world in which I'm going to go and charge my big melee unit into 5 scouts and not do the thing. Right? Because this is not enough OC to flip it off these intercessors, in which case I'm trading my thing for these 5 scouts. Never worth it.
This is some amazing tech right here.
Yeah. So if you're playing defensively, this is your setup. And if you're trying to figure out how to assail this with, obviously if you have guns, it changes. But you could still do a very similar thing with standing behind the train if these guys weren't here.
Yep.
You could be like, all right, I'll screen out the deep strikes, the 3 inches or whatever, and I'll still be on the objective. I'll still screen however I can. I'm using this to hide. But obviously in this instance, we're talking about melee and charging. But that's another thing you have to look about is, can I actually do the thing I want to do with the 1 unit that can kill 4 things it touches?
Right, yeah.
But can it touch all those things? And the answer is probably not, right? So in this case, obviously, it's not really worth going for it. So what you could do instead is be like, all right, next turn, I'll get you. But this turn, I'm not going to. So I'll stand behind this wall. That way now you have to think about, well, they're going to just walk in next turn and kill.
Yeah.
Now I move 6 inches. And now I actually make the charge. Now I can kill both units.
Exactly. Even if we were to rotate here, you're much more of a threat, and it's going to be very difficult. This is amazing tech. And again, not always the most narrative, but very tactical, right? Use those little screen units, those little cheap units, and that's something you'll kind of notice as a sub-theme in deploying, in learning to defend your objectives. Screens are so important. Units that screen other people out, just like flies through the screen door. Thank you for all the kind words and comments, folks. We appreciate it. Welcome Amon Hep, who's caught their very first live stream.
Oh,
Good to have you
welcome.
in chat. Thank you, folks. And definitely, don't forget to like the stream, leave a comment below. All right, so midterm, long-term plan for your future. Protect your board. All right, this is one. We just recorded a game last night, which will definitely, this will come up in. So protect your board. This is, again, protect what you have, protect your home objective, protect your expansion, and your deployment zone. Your deployment zone is worth buku points for your opponent. Between deploy, heliport, homers, behind enemy line, I feel like I'm forgetting, engage on all fronts. There's a lot of different things, containment. There's a lot of things that are just like points in the deployment zone. So how do you protect that? Today we're focusing on deployment. So what we'll say on that is, of course, the classic question, does your army have uppy downy? Does your army have 3-inch deep strike? These are the two big things.
Yep.
And of course, demons have both. So
Both of them.
both of them. So on that, I'll mention turn 1. You go first. Your opponent picks up a unit and can bring them down that turn. So if your opponent has uppy downy, be aware that literally even in deployment, you need to be prepared for the fact that if you go first, like Brian, you'll have to protect your backfield. And so in this case, I mean, infiltrators kind of make it easy, right?
Yeah. But let's say they're not. Let's just say that's another unit of intercessors.
Exactly.
Right?
In fact, yeah, go ahead and pass me those intercessors. Make sure you ask that question. Make sure you are prepared to go back. In this case, it's actually kind of nice because these are actual infiltrators. Sticky this objective, fantastic. What you need to do is just make sure that you're stopping them from landing in the back. So make sure you measure out that 9-inch and kind of push them back as far as you can. You can get cheeky with it. Often when you're defending your backfield, you want to use as few resources as possible to get the job done.
Yep.
And so what you can do is you can say, okay, it is demons, and it's big bases or plague bearers, which is pretty big as well. So let me grab a demon for y'all. Everything's coming apart.
Yeah, you just ripped off a wing off the learner change.
So here's Philaxi, who we're actually playing later on. Could uppy downy. They're not going to have the CP for the 3-incher.
You're like just off camera.
Oh yeah, classic. So let's... Oh, this is very disorienting. I can't move in that direction. My brain won't do it. Perfect. So she's got... Oh my god, this is breaking my brain.
Do you want to do it? Just do it in this
Brian,
corner.
I can't do it.
Just do it in this corner.
No, I refuse. There it is. So big base, right? So actually, in order to stop her from dropping within 9, you don't even need these guys, right? So you're able to keep some forward momentum while protecting your backfield there. But don't forget that. Ask that question. Set yourself up so you can defend against it. If they don't have that, well, guess what? You have a whole extra turn to protect yourself, to protect that backfield. This is, again, I love infiltrators. Anything that protects 12-inch deep strike, we're going to see that on Saturday as well, is massive because it will also get around the 3-inch deep strike from demons, the 3-inch deep strike from Aquilons, the 3-inch deep strike from Tau,
Inceptors, or Grey Knights, or whatever.
All the kids do it these days. So if you see that in your codex, just do yourself a favor and take it.
Yeah.
It is at a premium. Jump infantry and no 12-inch deep strike.
And this is, you could always do this in the first turn movement phase, but oftentimes I like to set it up in deployment. And the reason I like to set it up in deployment is because when you're going, especially if you're at like a tournament or it's like game 5 of 6 or whatever, you forget things. And it's really easy just to wash over something like, oh, I already did that. I fixed it. It's done. I don't need to worry about it. And then you go into your opponent's turn, you're like, I actually didn't fix anything.
Right.
And the hole is still there.
Yep.
And so now they get to use the hole that I left.
It's brutal.
Because I just wasn't thinking about it, right? So the more things you can do in deployment that you don't have to think about later in the game, the better it is. Because it just makes it easier for you to be able to have those moments of, I don't need to worry about this.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it lets you focus on other things in the game. But when you're playing against an army like Demons or Grey Knights or Eldar or a lot of things that have uppy, downy, and spades or have a lot of like deep strike stuff, the less you have to think about your army, the better. Because obviously there's a lot to think about with their army, so you want to try to make it less complicated for yourself.
Yep, just simplify.
Set it up before the game starts when you have all the time to think about whatever it is you want to do. That way, during the game, you can just focus on the actual game itself.
Yep, exactly. So uppy, downy, deep strike, that's the main thing for protecting your backboard. We've also mentioned, of course, set yourself up on these expansion objectives. Again, back to that question, so you have enough resources to last you, not the game, but at least 2 or 3 turns. And if you need to bring more stuff, you can reinforce it. And that all comes down to being able to set yourself up for that objective, recognizing this objective, setting yourself up for that in the deployment phase. Also, transports are great for this because transports are just like ogres and they have layers. And that'll be great to have. Sorry, I had to. So that is protect your board, folks. Next up, no threat ranges. This is a big one, and this is kind of like the final all-encompassing thing, right? Know where you can project outwards. We talked about Storm Boys and Jump Infantry being able to project outwards 12 inches to either do actions or advance and charge. We talked about being able to set yourself up in one turn for a later turn. So you need to know your threat ranges. You also need to know your opponent's threat ranges.
Yeah. And more to, it's not just like, oh, how far can your guns reach? That's not necessarily what we're talking about here. It's what weird abilities do you have that you can hit me with? So, for example, Librarians for Grey Knights, they have an 18-inch, it's not a gun, but it's an ability. So, like, that's part of the threat range you have to kind of worry about. Or do you have advance and charge? That's another big one. There's a lot of questions that you have to ask before the game. So, of course, uppy, downy being one of them, 3-inch deep strike, advance and charge, advance and shoot, fall back and charge, fall back and shoot. All those types of things are really, really important to know before the game starts to plan accordingly. So if Adrian has Votan, for example, and I'm like, okay, well, I've never played against Votan. Well, it's just, I've never played against him. I don't know what the army does. I know you have a lot of guns on your vehicles. What is like the maximum range of your guns? Now, Adrian being the opponent can tell me, oh, my max range is 36, but I scout with everything. So really, my max threat range is like 50-something because I scout and also move, and then now I can shoot you. So make sure you're asking the correct questions, because if you're just asked the question of like, oh, how far are the range of your guns, they'll tell you the range of their guns. But that's not really the range of the gun.
Not. And it's not about them like trying to hide information. It's just like it drives me crazy. That doesn't drive me crazy, but it's like an anxiety thing where they're like, what's the range on your guns? And I'm like, okay, this is the range, but there's this, this, and this. So not everyone's going to think about all those options. So ask the range, ask the movement, ask if they have advance and charge. Look at that whole thing. And personally, I think this definitely, in this case, comes from both of us. Assume the best out of your opponent. Assume that they are going to roll really well, that they're going to go far. Don't take anything for granted. There's people like Bridger that will be like, oh, they're not gonna do a 10-inch charge. But then people like Bridger will make a 10-inch charge. So if you set yourself up considering that they will do really well and you will do really poorly, and evaluate that based off of that, that is going to hedge your bets and protect you.
I always, like Adrian said, Adrian does the same thing. I always take the maximum threat range. And I'm outside of it. Doesn't matter what it is. I'm outside the maximum. I don't care. I will take the extra turn to get back into position if I need to guarantee that I don't die first turn.
Man, again, talking about teams tournament, we had Mark was playing Eldar and he went up against Knights, and he was just the whole weekend going crazy about this move where one of his opponents had a Lancer. And he did this crazy move where he took and made an 11-inch charge into a Warwalker, tank shocking it, piling into the Avatar, and killing it. Mark hadn't done the -1 to wound because he hadn't, who's going to make this 11-inch charge? No. It was madness, and it was just like, what can you do? And sometimes it's bad luck, but it also is a reminder of like, the worst case scenarios can and will happen. So decide as a player how much you want to gamble on that. Personally, we play very conservatively there.
Me and Adrian are the same. Bridger not. He'll put everything on the line and be like, go ahead, make your 4-inch charges. It's the same as a 10-inch charge.
If he dies, he dies.
Exactly.
So projecting and knowing the threat ranges of both your units, but also your opponents. Very important.
Measure it out. Don't just ask the question and be like, okay, 24 inches, that's pretty far, so I'll just stand over here. Measure it, guarantee that you have what you think you have, and guarantee or confirm it with your opponent. Be like, this is what you have, right? Cool, so I'm going to be here. Makes sense, right? Cool. And then confirm it with your opponent. That way, in deployment phase, you guys are both on the same page. And then once the first turn starts, you guys are both kind of aware of what you can and cannot do on both sides of the table.
I think that's so important, and just ask those questions. Like, this is one that happens all the time. Right here, again, we're deploying. I put my Storm Boys down. Brian hasn't done his infiltrators. He's like, okay, so how far do they move? I say 12 inches. They advance in charge? Yes. Okay. And then Brian goes and he says, okay, here's 18 inches. So this is as far as they move. I'm going to put my guy right here. So no matter what, oh, sorry, that's not after the charge. See, there we go, classic move. So let's say you're trying to be super, super safe. So I'm going to say 12-inch move, a 6 on the advance, and a 12-inch charge. Brian's trying to be super, super safe here because maybe he wants to be ready for containment right here. And then he measures it and he says, okay, so their maximum threat range is 30 inches. I'm just outside of 30 inches, so they cannot reach, correct? And I'll be like, yep, cool. And we've agreed, and we do that before we move any of our models because we are imprecise creatures. We will mess things up and bump things. So just measure it beforehand, check with your opponent, and then it's all good. And then you can be, as sloppy as humans are.
That's really important. The confirming is very, very important. Because if you're under an assumption of, oh, well, you can't reach me. And then your opponent's under the assumption of like, well, I saw you only measure 29 inches, not 30 inches. Or 30.1 inches,
you give them a chance to be like, oh, I think I have to be a little farther back, and you can be like, okay, sorry, we'll just,
But measuring it and confirming it is very, 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 very important to the game and how you play it. So Make sure you do it.
Fantastic. Well, folks, those are the main topics we want to hit. We have some specific examples we kind of want to go through. This is a great question if you have, this is a great point if you have questions about your particular armies. I've seen some, we can definitely go through them. And then we also have a super chat from Monikir1. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. $20 super chat, thank you very much. Can you go over layering infiltrators? My example is having 2 units of Jaegers. My opponent has used his infiltrators from me placing on the other side. What's the best way to place the second set of infiltrators? Okay, perfect. So this is talking about, when we say infiltrators, we're talking about units with the infiltrate keyword. So Monikir is saying, I placed one, they placed one, and now what do I do with the third one?
Yep.
Great question.
Yep.
Let's go through that. So let's see, let me grab some more infiltrators here. These ones are actually called infiltrators.
To the right.
Perfect. So we'll go here, and then let me just grab something. I don't know.
The Jaegers are with. Yeah, we'll do the Votann question.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna grab some Votann stuff.
Yeah, we actually have them ready. As we mentioned, Votann break a lot of these rules, interact with a lot of these things, so it's important to take a look at them. So where do you go with that other one? It's a great question. Do you want to do the Votann or do you want to do Space Marines?
Either way, I'm just gonna grab some units to
Yeah, sounds good. Let's put the Space Marines on this side, so I'll pull the Orcs off. Okay. So let's see. Going against Votann, there's 2 things. One.
Are they playing Votann or are they going against Votann?
I think this is assuming. Oh, thank you so much, Doug Getzinger, for the 5 gifted tabletop.
Thank you.
Thank you. Starting off the member train, honestly, really appreciate that. Didn't expect that today. So let's see, Monikir 1, having, they have 2 units of Jaegers.
Yeah,
My opponent has used his infiltrators from me, placing on the other side. Okay, here we go. Let's just grab.
You have like 5 more scouts that I could use.
Use some Pathfinders,
perfect.
which is 10 models as well. So it'll be 1 unit of infiltrators. Okay,
Sweet.
Perfect. So what's your goal as the Votann player here?
As the Votann player, I want to make it so that way if I do go first, I can potentially shoot. So as we mentioned earlier, Votann, basically everything in the army scouts.
Yeah,
so being able to protect your scouts is of the utmost importance. And being able to protect your scouts going forward, not necessarily going backward, pivoting to the side, or whatever the case is, because you can always do that. But you want to be able to go forward and then be able to apply pressure. You want the pressure turn 1 if you want to have a go turn on turn 1. So what I look for is to kind of do just that. Knowing that I have 2 units of infiltrate, my first unit of infiltrators, I will probably put very, very aggressively. So I win the roll-off, I get to choose who goes first with the deployment. So I'm going to take 10 of my Jaegers and be exactly 9 inches off of your deployment zone.
Oh, I like it.
And I'm going to stretch them as far across the table as I possibly can.
I love this. This is something that Orc Commandos are also great at. So we're going to measure 9 out, and then we're going to go 2 inches as far as possible. This is where these 10 strong units are very, very, very good. So we'll go like that, like that. Might need to pull 1 over.
We'll have to make the triangle too because it's 10-man squad.
So we'll triangle here. Perfect.
Cool. And
amazing.
Knowing that, or when I do this, I want to make sure that there's no room on one of the table edges for Adrian to put a unit here, because that will also disrupt my infiltrating, or my scouting, excuse me. So if you look here, there's nowhere that Adrian can put a unit that's going to be able to kind of fit in this space. Or there might be here, but when I would do it, I would make sure that there's no spot he can put his stuff.
And it's not within safety, and I'm not going to be able to deny this little staging point. So that things like your bikes or whatever, or your Sagittar, they could tuck in here now in safety and be good to go.
And so now what I have effectively accomplished is to guarantee that no matter what happens, even with Adrian putting his next unit of infiltrators down, these units that are staged in this general area will be able to be in the midboard before I even do my first movement phase. And then once I do my first movement phase, I move my 10 inches or whatever, and I can basically be touching Adrian's deployment.
Disgusting.
It just guarantees that I have the pressure if I want the pressure. And then my second unit after Adrian, so knowing that I have here, Adrian would of course deploy his second unit accordingly.
We're probably going to go across here
to make sure that I can't do it again.
Exactly. We're playing defensive here. This is already established some of the pacing of the early game. So I say, okay, maybe I'm going to I'm going to set more stuff up on this side, knowing that I can kind of push back that bubble. This is a spoiler. This is a sword. So I'm going to go ahead and put my infiltrators probably right up into the building. I'm not too worried about his melee. And again, if he spends a melee unit, Votann don't have a ton. I'm happy for him to do that. And we've accomplished our goal of protecting ourselves from the bigger threat. It's not the melee. It's all the guns.
Right.
So I would probably go here. And then how would you take this from here now?
And then my second infiltrate unit, I'm not going to put out to die turn 1, essentially.
Correct.
Because I've already accomplished what I want to accomplish, and Adrian has stopped me from doing, just doing it again.
Exactly.
My second unit, I'll probably stage in the building here.
Which again is outside of the deployment zone. Ready to cleanse, ready to whatever.
And then this also gives me a threat, because it's 10 bodies, to touch onto this objective. If I really wanted to go that route and be like, I'll go in, maybe I kill a guy.
Yeah.
But at the very least, it's 10 models.
Exactly.
To your 5, right?
Right.
So that's 10 OC to your 5, even if you killed 5 of them. I'll still be able to contest the objective. So this goes back to the whole trading and contesting. So I know that this unit, in theory, if I just walked onto this objective, could just stop him holding it. So that's something I'm comfortable doing. I'm still technically out of my deployment zone, but I'm not using the scout to its full potential like I am here. But it also gives me a unit to do secondaries if I need those secondaries as well.
100%.
So again, it goes back to the whole, just because you have scout doesn't mean you need to use it all the time to its maximum. This is enough. This is plenty.
This is doing a ton of work. So hopefully that's helpful, Monarchier 1. It's a great question. That the interaction back and forth becomes very, very interesting. I also want to thank Newmeister for becoming a captain. Welcome.
Welcome.
Take advantage of Knowledge November, KN. And next week's session, of course, is going to be for members only. So become a member today so you can be up to date on all of that. Also, if you are interested in more of this tactic stuff, we just did a deep dive into my Space Marine tactics at the team tournament. I go through all 6 games, deployment, movement, targeting, everything. And so if you're a Space Marine player or interested in Space Marines, definitely a great video to check out for the members. Fantastic. All right. I'm just catching up on chat. All aboard the Nurgle train, choo-choo. Love it. Thank you so much, Doug. Appreciate it. Beautiful. Okay, cool. So, yeah, let's talk about important, I don't know, army-specific stuff, right? So I want to highlight a few things. I want to highlight Nurglings, how important they are, how powerful they are. They have no OC. They cannot perform actions. So what can they do? They can do a couple secondaries. They can engage in all fronts. They can behind enemy lines. They can, that's about it. So they are a unit where they are, again, trying to do 2 things at once. If you get those secondaries, fantastic. But they're also just trying to screen out your opponent. They're trying to, again, protect your own movement. So we talked about here, Jaegers being able to move forward and protect the scout moves of the rest of the army. Nurglings are a unit where they protect the deep strike of the rest of the army by kind of pushing your opponent back and saying they're going to have to spend a resource to get in there. So Nurglings are super important for that. And that is also, frankly, a reason. Someone was asking about Imperial Knights. This is Chaos Knights, but this really helps those big, heavy monsters and units that are going to have a tough time getting through terrain. They're so easy to move block, things like that.
Yeah, very, very difficult to maneuver.
Imperial Knights, because we did have a question about Imperial Knights, they're tough to deploy, honestly.
Yeah.
Couple of things to remember. Nowadays, you can move through big terrain. You just suffer from a battle shock, which is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying, don't get me wrong. But what you can do in deployment early on is make sure that you're not having to go through that piece of terrain at a critical juncture in which you will be devastated if they get battle shocked. So you can deploy them in safety where they're able to be hidden out of line of sight, leverage the terrain, leverage the thing that is hurting you, right? This is the terrain that you hate because you got to go around it. Use the cover, then use it to kind of set up in this turn, maybe when you're not trying to fight for objective because you're throwing an armor over there. And then the following turn, you're out in the open, you're good. So the terrain, yes, 100% is a disadvantage for knights, but you want to set up in a way that you're going to be able to go ahead and just leverage it and then minimize the downsides of what potentially could happen. So that's an important thing there.
Yeah. Also, make sure that when you do deploy your knights, right? So this is the same base.
Yeah,
as
I think that's the base,
right?
yeah.
You don't want to stack, like if I had 4 Helverins,
yes,
I don't want to put all 4 Helverins right here to make it so they have to walk through this one choke point. Because now if Adrian has any kind of infiltrate, any kind of scout, if he goes first and he's very fast or whatever, he can just put a unit here and then be like, okay, you can move your 4 armigers, and that's all you get to go.
Yeah, it's horrible. This is how you beat knights, right?
Yeah, you just move blocking is a very powerful tool to have in your arsenal,
Yep.
Especially if you're playing against something like knights, right? So make sure that when you deploy, you have avenues of escape from your deployment zone everywhere you go. You don't want to stack everything in one choke point, like I said, because then this happens, and then you're really sad.
Yep.
Because it'll just continue to happen every single turn, because you can't escape, and then they'll just replace the unit, and then they'll replace the unit, and then they'll replace the unit. So make sure that you are leaving yourself open to be able to get out and to be able to deal with the units that are up in the mid board early on, so that way this doesn't happen every turn.
And this comes back to the concept of make sure your units are doing two things. You have less units than your opponents. You need your units to be doing probably three things every turn.
At least.
And again, this is kind of similar to the points thing. Having your units do three things is tough. So failing that, have your opponent's units only do one thing. And to that point, this sounds like I'm getting very abstract. If you have knights along all these entry points, your opponent now is going to have to spend multiple units, like one unit to block off one armorer on each and every single entryway. And the more you can kind of stretch their forces thin and kind of help you trade up into like unit action economy, the better. So force them to be inefficient with their little units so that your lack of units becomes less of an issue. You're kind of like closing that gap as quickly as possible.
This will also help you to gain a lot of information about both the type of player that your opponent is and also the way that they play their army. So if you have spots in all of these areas to walk through, most of the time your opponent will not try and block every single one of those spots.
Yes.
They're going to pick one, maybe two, and they're going to try to block those places, which now you know they're pushing for those objectives, or they're trying to stop you from getting to that side of the table. So at some point in the game, they're probably going to make a swing to that side of the table, so you can prepare going forward, knowing that they're stopping me from doing this, meaning they want to defend this as much as possible. So now I'm going to pressure that side. I want to apply more pressure to that side and more pressure to that side. And I want to push for that because they don't want me there. So now I want to be there. I mean, of course, that can also backfire, but just by and large, that's oftentimes what'll happen, in my opinion. Like if I was going against all the armor, just like, all right, I'm going to pick one spot, I'm going to stop this one spot. I don't want you to be anywhere near this middle objective because I don't want to have to try to contest it off you. So I'll stop you from being able to tag the middle, and then you'll kill a unit every turn, and that's fine, but I'll just keep throwing that unit away. And now Adrian, as the opponent, knows I don't want him there. So he's going to do everything in his power to get there, so that way I don't really have an answer to deal with it. So it's just stuff like that to make sure that you're leaving your options open.
Yep, it's all about options. Giving yourself more, giving your opponents less. Let's see, we just got tagged. Oh, great question, Atesh. Thank you for this. What do you do when your opponent starts shadow boxing while you're about to finish placing some anti-tank? This is something that... This is a great question, Atesh. I appreciate that. You gotta just, the nails are biting. You gotta let them just do their thing. They'll work it out. It's gonna be fine. And you just place your anti-tank. Don't engage with them. Just let them do their thing. It's better that way. You don't want them to throw any punches your side of the table.
Yeah, because eventually it won't be shadow boxing anymore, and it will just be it'll be boxing.
It'll be actual boxing. I do remember chess boxing was a thing for a while. I kept trying to convince Bridger to do Warhammer boxing, but he was not a fan.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Just saying, like a round of Warhammer, a round of boxing, really great. I think we can make a
good
new channel.
Great cardio.
Great cardio. Digital Designer, one of our fantastic mods, also bring up another fantastic point, talking about screening out fly units and the places they want to land. So again, this comes down to the concept of your opponents are going to have units that do cool things. Right? Hopefully that's the case. How do you, you're not going to be able to stop them all the time, but how do you mitigate and lessen what they're able to do? This, I think, is a great time to talk about our good friend, Mr. Angron and Mr. Bridger Han. This guy is terrifying. This army.
I've been hurt so many times.
Right? Like, deploying against this is a nightmare. They could get advance and charge of +2 movement. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. So you got the whole problem of setting up for 2 deployments. But let's say, again, you and I, we are going to be, cautious with our deployment. We're going to consider that they probably will get it, even if they don't. But we also need to be able to play the game within the first couple turns, especially because of the changes to secret missions. And so let's say, I guess we'll do world leaders on this side. And we've got some army over here. We kind of have a mix of Votan and stuff, but that's kind of a thing. Thinking about, Angron has advance and charge. He moves, is he 14?
He moves 14. Yeah, he does.
And with a potential advance and charge. So
Because we'll have the +2 move, so he'll move 14.
right. No, I think he's 14 base.
14 base?
I think. Hold on, let me see. I think he's a little bit crazy. He's a scary boyo.
That
Angron.
sounds illegal. 22-inch move?
Yeah, he moves 14 base.
Oh, okay.
14 base.
Okay. So 22-inch move.
Exactly. So we've got, this is the 14 base there. This is another 2 inches here. And then another 6 after that.
So 22.
Goes to here. Okay. So this is the range that we're looking at, and then there's
there's a charge. So off of this, Angron can charge up to basically the wall.
Exactly.
Of the deployment zone here.
So there's two things to consider here. How can one possibly stop this? The answer is you can't. But you can try to dictate where he's able to land and where he's going.
Yep.
So there's two things you can do. One, you go all the way to the very back. The downside of that is you might just be giving him extra movement, right? So what I try to do with Angron is I try to do a little bit of both. I'll try to have a lot of my stuff back and safe because remember, if he's advanced and charging, the whole army actually is. So there's multiple threats. But one, a lot of the army does not have fly. Two, he still has to land somewhere. And he's going to be trying to land somewhere in here. And if you can clog this up, so he has to land back here and he's charging all the way over to here, or he's just fighting your chaff units, that's a win. That's at least as big of a win as you can hope for when you're fighting against such reckless hate, you know?
Yep.
And so these are Jaegers. I'm not a Votan player, so these would normally be like Grots for me, Scouts, Storm Boys, something that's going to die. He cannot land, or he cannot go through buildings. He's got to go up and over them. So I will try to create this giant no-go zone where all this advance, maybe even this extra movement, all kind of just goes to waste. And he's having to land all the way here, make a giant charge with his giant base, which is like, this is a 10 inches just to clear the back of the Jaegers. And that is, again, a scary, scary charge. So Angron, of course, an extreme case, but you can look at Storm Boys, you can look at Jump Pack Intercessors. Where are the places that your opponent, in their deployment, is trying to stage or land before the charge?
Yeah.
How do you block that?
Yeah. I think also, because we're talking about world leaders, it's really important to talk about the way that Infiltrate interacts with world leaders.
Yeah.
Because they have so much scout. So it's kind of what we're talking about, like with the Votan stuff, where they want to guarantee have their scout, so that's what the Jaegers are used for, is to guarantee one flank will allow them to do the thing. Where in this instance, we're doing the opposite. We're trying to prevent the world leaders from being able to utilize their scout, because they're going to scout with Exalted 8-Bound, with 8-Bound, with the Juggernaut Lord, and with everybody that they could ever want to advance and charge with. They're going to scout forward to make sure that they can get guaranteed charges turn one. So now this goes to an instance where we're going to be doing the same thing that I just did earlier, but for the opposite reason, where I'm not going to try to scout forward because I don't really care. Like, let's just say let's do Infiltrators or something.
Okay, yeah, let's see.
Something that has a little bit more value. But in this case, in this matchup, the value is stopping the turn one charges, even if your opponent wasn't going to do those turn one charges.
Right, exactly.
So I would do the whole bit, 2 inches apart as far as I can. And I know that world leaders, they don't have any scouts, which means that I'm going to use 2 of my scout units.
Right.
So infiltrators and scouts, or 2 units of infiltrators, or 2 units of scouts, or whatever. And I'm going to just line the deployment zone.
And by scout, you mean infiltrate.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
2 units of infiltrators.
They have lots of scout.
Yeah. But we're just going to make sure that no matter what happens, there's no scout coming forward out of the deployment zone. So that way they have to rely on the +2 move, and they have to rely on the advance and charge. So that way I'm much more comfortable deploying a little bit more, not aggressively, but normally.
Right,
Like having like a normal deployment.
You're approaching normalcy a little bit.
Yeah.
And in this case, you're having to deal with Angron a little bit less, and the rest of the army, not really anything at all.
Right.
We're spending a lot. We talked about never use a unit to do one thing. In this case, you're kind of doing a lot of things, even though it looks like you're just doing one.
Yeah.
And you kind of just have to.
It's
one of world leaders' strengths, you know?
Yeah.
You got to pay that price. I do want to mention, because someone asked at the very beginning, they were tuning in just for their world leaders. If you're a world leader player, what are we trying to do here in response to this? We've just given a lesson on how to beat them.
Yeah.
How do you stop it?
So in this instance, you don't ever want to trade a big nasty unit for 5 infiltrators or 5 scouts or 5 whatever. So you want to find the angles to stage. So that way you're projecting this constant threat of I will touch you and kill whatever it is that I touch at any point in the game if you step out into the midboard.
Exactly.
So the L here, for example, in the this ruin is an amazing staging point.
Yes.
This ruin is an amazing staging point. This ruin, again, amazing staging point. So you want to find buildings that you can use. And of course, if they're in a straight line in front of you, you're going to have to go through some units.
Yeah,
Like that's just going to be
sure.
the case. But because of the way that your opponents are going to deploy against you, there's going to be gaps. Like these 2-inch gaps, you can just move through so long as your base fits. So when you do charge with, let's say this is the 8-bound or something.
Yeah. Oh, I got some 8-bound for you.
Oh, yeah.
Track and field guys, as Bridger likes to say. Woo! Here you go. So these are on 40s.
So these are on 40s, which will definitely fit, as we can see, in between this 2-inch little gap. When you charge, you want to go to the other side of the unit. That way, after you fight, you can kill stuff, whatever. You pile in, and let's say it's over on this objective, actually, because that makes a little bit more sense for what I'm thinking here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you fight onto the objective, right? You charge, you make it through to the other side. You have to base, so of course you do base, but you want to base in such a way that when you kill the unit, your 3-inch consolidate will hide you behind this building. So I fight you, I kill the unit, they're gone now, and now I've accomplished multiple things. I've killed one of your screening units, I have successfully gotten onto the objective, and now I'm hiding.
Exactly.
So this unit that can only do one thing
right.
is actually doing really 3 things.
Yeah. 100%. And I think that is exactly the kind of things you need to be looking towards if you're a World Ages player to get around it. It also is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the Masters of Execution in this army. Fight first is huge because you're now kind of out there in the open. They might try to slap back. Fight first is going to be very important. Let's say they didn't give you the 2-inch gap, and you basically you're stuck. You're stuck right here, and you're having to fight. And so when you go in, there's 2 options. One, you go in, you're at least on the point. Cool. Let's say you're not able to do that. You go in, you fight, you attack them, you kill them. Awesome. If you're going up against a melee army, stage your fight first folks here. And this is something that I do with my Dark Angels, right? If they want to go in, make sure, pre-measuring, that you will have 6 inches to wherever they are going to get in combat so you can intervene, fight first, and actually defend the guys that you just had to put out right into the open. So that's something you can do if you're going up against another melee army. If you're not, you really want to play for the ruins, but both are effective ways of like not eyeing your opponent, right?
And just because you have the ability to advance and charge and do everything you could possibly ever want on
Yes.
turn 1, doesn't mean you have to. Bridger, doesn't have to happen every time. And oftentimes you'll see that a lot of like the really, really good World Ages players, they actually don't.
Yeah.
They use turn 1, they use the scouts, and then they hide in these buildings and they set up for a following turn. So
Exactly.
everything in the army can charge on turn 2 instead of just 2 units or Angron +1 or Angron +2. So being able to recognize when you can go all in and when you don't want to go on. So for example, there's armies that don't like a ton of pressure.
Right.
So Grey Knights being one of them, they do not like a lot of pressure.
Yep.
Eldar being another one, they hate a ton of pressure.
Yep.
Any of the flavors of
Any Eldar, yeah, I was going to say.
Tyranids also, oftentimes they don't want a ton of pressure. So there's armies that you can walk into confidently knowing like, if I give you a lot of pressure turn 1, you're not going to have a great way to deal with it. But there's some armies that can just stand there and be like, I will shoot you.
Yeah.
You'll kill a couple of things, but you will now die.
Exactly.
And the pressure doesn't matter as much. So you need the projected threat to keep them honest.
Yep, 100%. Let's see, questions from chat. Niftiness says, when deploying, are there certain units you prioritize to put in line of sight blocking terrain? How much terrain do you generally put on a table that blocks line of sight? Fantastic question. So we do a lot of, almost every piece of terrain blocks line of sight for us. The only exception is crates. If we're playing like frontline style, then they will. But generally speaking, that's the only piece of terrain that we put on the table that does not block line of sight these days. It's kind of mandatory. It's how the game was designed around. Again, we've been very big proponents of playing at least variations off the GW style because ultimately this is what the game was designed for, right? And you notice this is, I really like this layout. I think it's a good amount of coverage. This open objective in the middle, think of it what you will, it is the standard, right? You might be a little bit more hidden where it's like this sometimes, so you can get close and be hidden or whatever, but there's, generally speaking, nothing ever touching that center objective. So center objective, generally a death zone. For good games of Warhammer, we kind of follow what is here, right? We said, even as we mentioned, home base, safe-ish expansion objective, and then 1 or 2 places to be hidden, so that if you wanted to deploy carefully, you should not really be able to be shot turn 1 unless your opponent is like Votan and really good at doing that specifically. And that's a good way to establish just a good, even, balanced game of Warhammer that can be really fun and really competitive. So when building your boards, we kind of use that as a model, even if we're not playing like a GW standard. You look at our boards for fun, we still try to build in that level of balance, that level of line of sight blocking, so that it's not just like a bloodbath on playing a bowling ball.
Yeah, for sure. And then how do you prioritize your deployment for units that you want to make sure are actually hidden?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I try to hide almost everything that I can. If something is out in the open, it's because it's almost the opposite. It's when am I choosing to not put something behind line of sight, and that is when I either think it's worth the risk. So for example, being able to get out and do an action turn 1 which just would not be possible at all, or if it's kind of a little bit of bait where if my opponent comes and kills that unit, I'm happy for them to do that because then I get to respond, and I don't mind necessarily losing that. So, for example, Deathwing Knights. Again, it's just got Dark Angels on the brain. -1 damage, 4 up involved, 2 up save, cover, armor contempt. They're very, very tough. And often I'm happy for someone to try to go kill them because that means they poked out something that I can then shoot back or charge against. And they'll be kind of the big thing that goes out kind of in the open. And then the inner circle, much more fragile, but usually with fight first, will sort of approach behind, ready to intervene and do the killing. And then my little more fragile units will be kind of in the wings, ready to jump out, probably dying then, but not before it's their time to die.
Yep.
So yeah, my default is actually hide everything and then decide who can handle moving forward. What are you benefiting for not being hidden? Yeah, I don't know, how about you? How do you
I'm kind of the same way. I oftentimes will play armies that, aside from recently, I've been playing Grey Knights recently, but I play Eldar, everything dies. Anything that's out and exposed is just dead, and that's kind of how I play the game. That's how I approach the army, which may or may not be the correct way to play it, but that's how I enjoy playing it, is if it can be seen, I just write it off as a casualty. It's dead to me. It's done its thing, and I no longer count that as a unit I will have in the future. And if it's still alive, then it's just a bonus. So when I deploy, it's very much in the same way, where if my opponent can get an angle on it, if they can get a line to shoot it, or if they can charge it, it's already dead to me, and I don't want to start the game with a unit out of my list. So I hide everything that I possibly can, and if I can't hide it, it starts off the table.
Exactly.
Because there's some things that you just can't hide, or there's some deployments where you just can't hide all your stuff, and it happens. Like if you're playing against Votan, because again they do the really scary thing of scout and then shoot all the guns, or you're playing against World Eaters where they scout and then charge you, especially if you don't have infiltrate. That's a really, really terrible thing to be on the receiving end of.
Oh my god, it's brutal.
So in those instances, I will start as much stuff off the table as I can. Like it'll make it so if I go first, I don't have as many things to play the game with. But if they go first and they charge and they kill a bunch of stuff, I still have half my army to come in on the turn 2. And it's a very conservative approach.
Yeah, sure.
But again, that's just the way that I play. But yeah, I hide everything that I possibly can. Even when I'm playing Grey Knights, where they have a 2-up armor save, 4-up invul on most of the army.
Why give them something
armor contempt? Like, why would I ever give you anything if I don't have to give you anything?
Now, the one exception is if you go completely the opposite. If you, at a certain point, if you're exposing enough options for your opponent, well, you've already given them the maximum benefit. Now the things that are further back and being hidden, now you're basically you're paying the negative price without the benefit. In which case, push more things forward. And there's not a ton of armies in the game that want to do that, but things like World Eaters can kind of deploy very, very aggressively. Sometimes Orcs, especially if you're running lots of transports. Knights can be a similar thing if you're just trying to stat check someone. If you're a tank a gun line like Iron Storm or
Guard
CSM
or whatever.
Guard, then more is more, and they're gonna kill a few things turn 1, but the price that they pay is going to be not proportional to the things that you lost. So it's more of an exception to the rule. You probably, if you're one of those armies, you probably already know it, but something to consider.
I mean, we talk about it all the time too. If you go back and watch any of our games, and we have our go turns, I'll oftentimes, especially me, I'll oftentimes say, well, if I'm going to give you something, I'm going to give you everything. Because now your opponent has to make the decision of where they want to go. And it's much easier to kill 2 things that are exposed as opposed to killing an entire army that's exposed.
They probably can kill 2 things no matter what. So once you have 3, 4, 5 things, they're still only killing 2, and the rest are out there, and they're ready to get in there.
And it's become something I say often. It's like, well, if I'm going to give you something, I'm going to give you everything. And I'm just going to make you deal with it. And then we're just going to play from there going forward. But that's kind of like the way to think about deploying too. With these some of these armies that do this, with Knights being a good example, is because you're not going to be able to hide every single Knight behind a building. So as soon as you have 3, 4 Knights exposed, who cares?
Just get that benefit, get that movement. And often I think you won't often see that happen to us in deployment, but we might prepare for it on turn 2 or 3, which starts with deployment. Knowing, and again, Dark Angels works, many of these armies that have that big go turn, they are going to be fully exposed for that go turn, but they don't care. They are there, and so prepare yourself for that and know what you're looking for. Fantastic, folks. Well, this was a lot.
This was a lot.
This was a lot of information. Hopefully it was helpful. Again, oh, you know what? I did have actually one more image. It's just all of the questions and points summarized together. In case anyone wants to reference that. I don't see the mouse. Oh, it's on the left. Here it comes. Here it comes.
Oh,
Boom.
here it comes.
So here it is. I'm going to go ahead and blow it up. If this mouse is really tiny.
I don't see the mouse at all.
It's gone. Brian, it's gone.
Oh, there it is.
This is professional. Boom. Even more professional. There you go. Screenshot it. Ask yourself these questions. Deployment, very, very important. Very fun, very rewarding part of the game. It's going to determine pretty much the next 3 hours of your life. So make sure you do it well. And of course, this is just the start of Knowledge November. We're going to be doing lots of tactics discussions. Let us know in the comments below what you want to see and become a member because this is going to be all for them. So really appreciate everyone coming out and supporting the show. We appreciate it. We'll be live in just an hour and 40 minutes with a game of Warhammer. I'm going to be playing the Diamonds. And what are you playing today?
Templars. We're just gonna kill you, I think. I don't know.
yeah. You're not gonna use any of the things that we learned today.
No, nothing. I'm gonna be channeling my inner bridger and just charging everything.
Yes, because hey, if I'm gonna give you something.
Look, you have to know the rules in order to break them.
That's true.
Right? That's all that matters. I know them. I just choose to ignore them.
I'm so prepared for today to be like, do as we say, not as we do, kind of thing. So join us for that. It's gonna be an absolute blast. And thanks so much. We'll catch you all next time on the tabletop. Bye.